While we give out billions in foreign aid and our banks give away billions in loans to communist countries that will not pay back, Americans themselves are living in some of the worst conditions that can be found anywhere. My friends, this is still the United States of America, and these things ought not to be. Someone must speak out, someone must take a stand, and the strength to defend the helpless against these encroachments what must come about through the union of those who are determined, those who will be the flame of freedom that speaks at any price, at any cost. The flame of freedom must speak in America before it is too late.
Independence Day 1984, 5,000 people from 24 nations gather in a mountain valley near Yellowstone Park to hear Elizabeth Clare Prophet at an international conference for spiritual freedom. Elizabeth Clare Prophet has a heart for the coming revolution. Noted author, lecturer, educator, and world religious leader, Mrs. Prophet delivers prophetic messages on the critical issues of our time. In her challenge to the people of Earth, who will be the flame of freedom that speaks, she calls for compassion and courage to deliver the nations in this time of trouble. Elizabeth Clare Prophet believes that fiery hearts empowered by God can and shall reverse the tide of the downward course of civilization. Listen now as Elizabeth Clare Prophet delivers her soul-stirring message, The Flame of Freedom Speaks.
I hear the world singing a hymn of hope. I hear the soul of America singing an anthem of freedom, singing the song of the pilgrims who settled on the East Coast, singing the song of the Patriots who fought to secure the sacred fires of liberty, singing the song of our fathers who established and ordained the Constitution of these United States of America, singing the song of the pioneers who struck out toward the setting sun across the mountains, hills, and plains to conquer the wilderness, singing the song of native sons north and south around 100 circling camps, singing the song of the men and women who have labored generation after generation to form a more perfect union, who lived and laughed and cried and fought 2 wars to make this world safe for freedom. Yes, I hear the soul of America singing the song of freedom, but I also hear the souls of this mighty people crying out as tyranny stalks. Tyranny, you ask, in the land of the free? We have our freedoms, you say. We can speak, assemble, pray, petition for the redress of grievances, and publish what we will. We do not have gulags. We are secure in our homes. We do not fear the midnight knock of the secret police. Perhaps not, but we are victims of a tyranny whose shackles are subtler and thus more difficult to break. Who will be the flame of freedom that speaks in America today? I hear the cry of mothers and fathers whose children are being led into the lifelong bondage of ignorance through a failing system of education. Children who cannot draw an inference from written material, solve complex math problems, or write a persuasive essay. Some cannot write an essay of any kind. 25% of whom will not finish high school, who are part of the first generation of young people whose educational skills will not surpass, will not equal, will not even approach those of their parents. I hear the groan of the 13% of all 17-year-olds who are functionally illiterate. Though uneducated, they know very well that they are being left behind in a world that is becoming ever more technically sophisticated. I hear the cry of a generation of youth which has had to run the gauntlet to reach a maturity that many may never know. Who will be the flame of freedom that speaks for them? Do we no longer care for those who are helpless? In ancient Greece, female infants were left to die. Today it is baby does. I feel the awful pain of rejection piercing the hearts of newborn children, left to die because of some real or imagined handicap, or for the convenience of their parents. Who will be the flame of freedom that speaks for them? Have we turned our backs on our children? Did you know that over 1 million American children will run away from their homes this year? That 50,000 of those children will never be heard from again? They will simply disappear. That almost 6,000 children will take their own lives this year rather than enter the conveyor belt of the mechanization man syndrome? Why do you suppose more and more are leaving home? Some children leave for the adventure. Some run away to escape the savage beatings of a parent or guardian. Others because they are the victims of incest or sexual molestation. Still others, the throwaway kids, will be kicked out. The vast majority will end up on the street. Where does a young runaway find a job? I'll tell you. In the sex industry, pornography or prostitution. Incest, child abuse, abandonment, child pornography, and the procuring of children is illegal in every state, but the laws are seldom enforced. There are an estimated 600,000 child prostitutes in the United States today, half male, half female. Who will be the flame of freedom that champions their rights to live a decent life? Consider this case of Jinnah, age 14, born and raised in Seattle. Her father died and her mother left her and her brother in the care of their stepbrother and his wife. This is her story in her own words. Let your heart open and feel her plight. 2.5 years ago, me and my little brother ran away together because of what my stepbrother done to us. He beat us up all the time, and then he raped me 3 times. So we ran downtown. My stepbrother found out where we were. He broke down the door and smacked me with his hands and took us back. When he got us home, he started beating me. I jumped out the back window and went downtown. I was on the streets for about 4 months, and then my little brother ran away and found me. He lives with me. Her brother is 11 and small for his age. We live in cheap motels. I bought him a TV, black and white. He loves TV. He's all I got. I got to take care of him. And where does she get the money to support them both? Hustling. That's the only way you can survive down there. I first heard about it from a girlfriend. She knew how I could make $50. All this guy wanted was to see your body. He was about 40. He took me to this old hotel. I was scared. We had sex. When he was done, he took me back to Pike Street, where my girlfriend was. That's how I got into hustling. I was 12. There's been a lot of men since him. You know something? I don't really like sex. And except for my little brother, I don't think anybody ever loved me. I'm a Catholic. A lot of times I think, what's going to happen to me when the world comes to an end? I try to go to church. I get lonely. That's when I go and I think about what's God's going to do to me. But hustling's the only way I can support my little brother. I would have done anything else, but I couldn't get a job. There aren't any for street kids. A lot of runaway children die young from malnutrition and drugs, disease and violence. They start with marijuana, which disorients their minds and destroys the sense of self-worth. And then they move on to coke, speed, LSD, and other hallucinogens, quaaludes, and sometimes heroin. I see the bewildered looks on the faces of those whose only source of protection and affection comes from those who exploit them, the pimps and the mafia who organize prostitution rings. I hear the souls of these children crying out to the mother of the world for refuge. If we permit this wholesale abuse of our children, is it any wonder we are tolerant of the mad scientific procedures called fetal experimentation? Some scientists perform surgery on living, aborted fetuses without anesthesia. 2 scientists in Helsinki severed the heads of 8 infants born alive following hysterotomy abortions, and then forced a liquid sugar substitute through the large arteries in their necks so they could study the way the brain uses carbohydrates. This is going on planet Earth today. Did you know that a fetus can feel pain at 13.5 weeks and probably earlier? Do you know there's a soul in that body just like there's a soul in your body? I hear the cry of the world mother weeping for her children. Who will be the flame of freedom that speaks for the world mother and her children? Friends of freedom, this is why we gather in the heart of the inner retreat, to celebrate our freedoms, our victories, and our way of life, and to freely also discover what are those things that are eating away at the very fabric of our life, at the very body and consciousness and soul of our being. Did you know that in the 1930s, U.S. Public Health Service investigators left blacks with syphilis untreated so they could determine the long-term effects of the disease? Did you know that? Is anyone telling you that? This is our government. Or that in 1953, the people of St. George, Utah, were exposed to deadly nuclear radiation and were told there is no danger. This is our government. Yet we, the people, are the government. Are we going to stand by and be the guinea pigs of some people when the government belongs to all people? No! Did you know that between 1945 and 1962, 250,000 U.S. servicemen on our own soil were exposed to high levels of radiation without their knowledge or consent as part of a government experiment to test human, psychological, and military responses to nuclear stress? Did you know that the early batches of polio vaccine were contaminated with a carcinogenic virus called SV40, and that the public was not informed? Did you know that during the 60s, researchers from New York's Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center inoculated elderly patients with live cancer cells without telling them in order to measure their immune response? Even though we hear a lot of talk about improving the so-called quality of life, many people, in fact, have a callous disregard for life, from infanticide to the next stage of euthanasia. The duty to die pronounced by Colorado Governor Richard Lamb. To these unannounced experiments upon an unknowing civilian population, to the simple fact that it is still legal to smoke tobacco. Cigarettes are the leading cause of preventable premature death in the United States. 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam. 300,000 Americans will die prematurely this year due to cigarette-related lung diseases. Is it surprising then when an Agent Orange exposed Vietnam veteran enters a VA hospital seeking an examination for cancer of the bladder or liver, he is often given a psychiatric examination? Who will be the flame of freedom that speaks for them? Between 1975 and 1982, 7 years, the Defense Intelligence Agency has reportedly received over 1,600 reports about American soldiers missing in action in Southeast Asia who are still alive. Soldier of Fortune wrote about gaunt, hard-working crews of Americans in prison camps who were wearing Asian clothing and who were kept apart from the rank and file of other people. Let the flame of freedom speak. 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 I hear the cry of the Black and Latino women who are involuntarily sterilized without their knowledge or consent. Freedom of speech? Yes. But what good does that do a victim of radiation poisoning who will die from leukemia? Freedom of the press? Well, we can write about these abuses all we want if we can find out about it in time to make a difference. I hear mothers and fathers weeping over the senseless death of 241 Marines in Beirut. Who will speak for those Marines now silenced by neglect? They did their job, but did our government do its job to protect them? No. And I hear the outrage of 269 souls who lost their right to be the flame of freedom that speaks when KAL Flight 007 was exploded out of the sky. I hear the stirrings of the souls of a nation as it slowly awakens to the fact that others have deprived them of the freedoms they came to believe were their birthright. One of the rights most fundamental to the establishment and maintenance of our freedoms is the right to own private property and to determine its use. This right is being eroded daily. I hear the cry of the people forced out of their homes by the federal government for a crime no worse than that they lived in or near a national park or forest. The people of Cuyahoga Valley, Ohio, were driven from their homes when the National Park Service condemned their entire town and then reopened it as a museum to show what it was like when people lived there. Churches, schools, businesses, all were condemned. I hear the cry of Betka Lankovska, a retired single parent living in the Malibu Canyon area. Since she lived in a high-risk fire zone, she could not get fire insurance on her home until she removed the brush and weeds from several acres of land behind her house. She was required to get a permit from the California Coastal Commission to clear the land. And for the permit, she had to have a hearing. She applied for the permit in the spring of 1978. In October, she finally got a hearing, but the permit was held up until her property could be searched for a potentially endangered species of weed that was thought to live in her area. She was told that if she removed so much as a bush from her land before the permit was issued, she could be imprisoned or fined for $10,000. As Californians know, the wheels of the Coastal Commission grind slowly. While Betka was still waiting for her permit, the Malibu Agura fire of 1978 swept through the canyon and destroyed her home and everything she owned. She had no insurance. Who will speak for the common people, the little people whom Abraham Lincoln loved? Who will speak for these people who are defenseless against the bureaucracies and the momentum gaining of the power elite? Who will speak for them? I hear cries of despair, groaning from the spirits of the 1/4 to 2 million homeless Americans plagued by hopelessness and shame. While we give out billions in foreign aid and our banks give away billions in loans to communist countries that will not pay back, Americans themselves are living in some of the worst conditions that can be found anywhere. I hear the cry of the unemployed, the steelworker, the miner, the lumberjack. I hear the cry of the farmer who hangs on to his land, hoping he will be in business this time next year. Foreclosures and bankruptcies are mushrooming in the farm industry. Take the case of David Denley, a talented, aggressive, 41-year-old farmer whose 850-acre spread is going under. He suffered an $80,000 loss on his livestock in 1981, a lowland flood in '82, and a drought in '83. It was even a greater brutality that drove him out of the business: high interest costs. Who sets those interest costs and rates? Who is tampering with the farmers of America, with their money, with their livelihood, with the value of their land? Who is it? Let them be exposed by the flame of freedom that speaks. When Dan found he could no longer service debts of more than $600,000, he decided to sell out. Denley hopes the sale of his assets will cancel his debts so he can get a job and start fresh. He says, "I'm back to zero, right where I was in 1966. When I'm in a crowd or at church or in town, that works on me. I get this feeling that we failed. I suppose we did." My friends, this is still the United States of America, and these things ought not to be. Someone must speak out, someone must take a stand, and the strength to defend the helpless against these encroachments what must come about through the union of those who are determined, those who will be the flame of freedom that speaks at any price, at any cost. The flame of freedom must speak in America before it is too late. Even though we're in the midst of an economic recovery, 10 or perhaps 20% of the breadbasket farmers in America are in the same danger. In most cases, the primary reason for the failure does not lie with the farmer. As in the case of the homeless, the unemployed miner, the steelworker, the black teenager, the electrician, or the mechanic, the overriding culprit is the state of the economy, with which these people had nothing to do. They are the victims of the manipulators and the spoilers in our midst. The cycle of boom and bust, of inflation and recession, is not a natural part of the economy. It is created artificially by the Federal Reserve System and the federal government, and it is exploited fully and to the hilt by the banking industry. Although most people don't completely realize how it operates, they understand the effects. When the money runs out, we have to rely on the mission, says Michael Hartwell, an unemployed forklift driver from Flint, Michigan. Kids don't understand recession and depression and all the big words adults use. They just know their stomach's empty and it hurts. and in the land of plenty their stomachs ought not to be empty. Who is depriving the people of their rightful and lawful inheritance? Let them be exposed by the flame of freedom that speaks. The Fed is an elaborate instrument created by the bankers to manipulate the economy by either increasing or decreasing the amount of available money and credit. Its actions influence the health of markets and inflation and interest rates. The Fed is supposed to fine-tune the economy. It is debatable whether it does or even can do that. But there is no question about the Fed's ability to influence the economy and the lives of individuals. Did you know that each half-point increase in mortgage rates disqualifies about 1 million potential home buyers from getting loans? A few men's decisions can alter the life of millions of Americans, and these men were never elected by we the people. I hear the cry of the people of America held in bondage by the gross mismanagement of the economy. I hear the cry of the people who put their money in Bank of America, Citibank, Chase Manhattan, Manufacturers Hanover Trust, Morgan Guarantee, the Chemical Bank, and Continental Illinois, whose irresponsible directors turned around and loaned it to nations that will never pay them back. That money comes out of the deposits of hard-working Americans who have lived by the ethic of being thrifty and saving and watch their savings grow by interest, not expecting that those very savings would be stolen by thieves within the banking system. Bankers and government leaders are busily looking for a solution to the world banking crisis brought on by the $800 or so billion of international debt owed by third world and communist nations to Western banks. Why is all this money going out of the country? What is the stated goal and purpose? Is it greed only, or is it a madness for power, and power to control the world, or power to create a one-world economy? What is the grand design of those who send away America's money and do not feed her own poor, do not take care of her aged, and have to debate whether or not it's worth paying the medical bill to keep a child alive who needs extensive care upon being born? Who are these great creators of our destiny who do it with our money, yours and mine? Who are they? Let them be exposed by the flame of freedom that speaks. I'll tell you one thing. They don't plan to take the rap. They are not going to suffer the loss when bad debts don't get paid. And they expect with a reasonable amount of certainty that the government will bail them out. That means the taxpayers will bail them out, either through direct infusions of dollars from the Treasury or through credit pumped into the banks by the Fed. That is artificial money. And the more money they make, the more money is around, and the less your dollar is worth. And therefore, a bite of your dollar is going to support these big bankers, supported by a federal bureaucracy that you did not vote for, a machine and a decision that is not your own. Republican form of government in America is slipping through our fingers, through these monopolies, through these bureaucracies, and through this power elite who think they know how to run our lives, our pocketbooks, our jobs, our industry, our country, our families, and our children. In either case, it's the government's policy not to let the big banks fold. Little banks, savings and loans companies can and do fold every day. They're the work and the dreams of the little people. They're the heart of private enterprise. They're usually bought up by one of the mega banks like Chase. But a big bank has the power of the federal government behind it. Why? Why doesn't the federal government represent the little people? It was founded in order to guarantee the rights of the people against tyrants. Have we forgot? Now it's the tyrants who are being defended by our government. And who is the voice of the people? Who will be the flame of freedom that speaks for this nation? Before it becomes a dictatorship, not unlike the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. You think that is so far away? You don't know. It's subtle, it's creeping, and it happens to little people everywhere, every day. They cry out to God. But do they have the money to defend themselves? Can they fight the monolith of power that is emerging in this nation, heartless, to crush the individual? What's the matter with individualism? What's the matter with the identity of the individual person? Why can't he be unique and different? Why does everybody have to be numbered by computers? Why does everybody just become a number in their system? Are we going to allow them to stamp out the personality of our souls, the creativity of our hearts, our right to be individuals? No! Well, let's look at what the Fed is doing. One of the greatest monopolies in this country. The more money the Fed pours into the large banks, the more inflationary the economy becomes. And as a result, the government is destroying, or at least wounding, the small and medium-sized businesses of America and creating the conditions for a strong inflation, a deep recession, or both. A lot of the experts on money and banking today predict an economic cataclysm any minute. Any minute, they say. Maybe they are the prophets of doom, you say. I believe there is hope, but I believe that that flame of hope has to move into action on the part of an enlightened, educated citizenry that does not allow the very key to the abundant life to be destroyed in this manner. The little people may lose their jobs, their homes, farms, and hope for the future. But because their failure would be bad for the economy, the big banks will be rescued. I hear the fears of the people who wonder if the debt bomb will destroy the economy and ruin their future. How did it all begin? It started with the Congress giving its control of our money system to the Fed, which enabled what have become the mega bankers to control the system covertly. After the Great Depression, caused in large measure by the Fed, the federal government became increasingly more protective of the banking industry, particularly the big banks, so that we would not have a repeat of the Depression. This was the rationale of government control. So the bankers turned the government's guarantees to depositors into an insurance policy to cover the bad loans they have made to foreign governments and to give them the confidence they needed to make so many bad domestic loans. But since it's not the government's policy to let large banks fail, they can count on being bailed out when the going gets tough. On your money, my money, or funny money that isn't even real and makes us feel wealthy when we're not. Did you know that in 1982, the federal government gave Western banks $177 million to keep Poland from going into default by covering the interest on loans owed to those banks? You wonder why Solidarity didn't make it? Because this government decided to protect the international bankers instead of the freedom fighters in Poland. That's why. Did you know that the federal government extended $120 million in credit to Romania at 7% interest to enable their communist government to build nuclear steam generators? How about backing the faltering steel industry? How about helping our farmers? How about shoring up America? What do they have in mind? There is no need for a man, woman, or child in this nation to go hungry or jobless, to be undernourished, to be wanting in the finest education of the world. We are determined to reverse the tide. We are determined to reverse the tide. There is enough room in this great land for every aborted baby annually to live, to grow up, to be free, and to have enough room, livelihood, and jobs to enjoy a fruitful life. There is enough room for all of the aged whom we are told ought to die. There is enough room for the handicapped. There is enough room for all of us who come into life together and must share the grand burden and the noble experiment of a free people, and by doing it right, export that example to all nations. We are the flame of freedom that must speak for a world, and if we do not speak, who else will? Who else will speak if we do not? Shall we be dumb dogs that will not bark, as Beckett said, will not protest in the face of heinous crimes against humanity? Shall we be those dumb dogs, or shall we speak out? We have a Goliath in our midst. Did you know that in June of 1983, Congress, in what has been called the big bank bailout, gave the International Monetary Fund $8.4 billion in funding, an increase to help cover loans to communist countries that were not paying back what they borrowed from U.S. banks. Who would suffer if the communist countries were allowed to default? The bankers would collapse, the communist nations would collapse, and the little people of the world would rise up in the flame of freedom and once again claim their nations, their banks, their institutions, and their industries for freedom. Why do our boys have to fight in Vietnam in a no-win war when our government, the power elite, and the banking houses are supporting an international communist system? They're supporting it for managed conflict so they can also manage the outcome. That's what they're doing. Why should our Marines die in Beirut? Why should they die anywhere? Why should any freedom fighters of any nation have to die fighting world communism when it's already a dead beast? We just need to let it go. Did you know that the United States government, that's us, remember, not they. They think it's they, but we know it's us. What they did in our name is to guarantee more than $70 billion in direct loans to the Soviet Union from the private bankers. That's what they've done with our money and our flame of freedom. At $17.67 billion, the Soviet Union is the largest recipient of loans subsidized by Western governments, as the Wall Street Journal recently asked. The Soviet subsidy loan level, never before acknowledged by the lending countries, raises an interesting question for Europe's political and business leaders. When did taxpayers in the lending countries ever decide to subsidize communism? I hear the cry. I hear the cry, and you hear it, of the people who are paying more and more of their annual earnings into a bankrupt social security system. In order to honor its obligations, today's workers may have to pay a payroll tax of more than 40% for each worker earning $20,000 a year. As it is, the social security system lives from bailout to bailout. And there are great inequities in the system. Listen to this. A black male born today has a life expectancy of about 64 years. But based on current legislation, which has pushed the retirement age to 67 on the average, that black male will not live long enough to receive any benefits at all. But he will pay into the system all the days of his life and owe his soul to the company stole. How's that for manipulation? How's that for manipulation? Create the retirement age above your life expectancy and promise you in the end, you'll get your benefits. I hear the cry of the unemployed and the underemployed who are being deprived of their sacred labor by the deindustrialization of America, caused by the intentional diversion of investment capital away from the United States to foreign countries. Did you know it was intentional? Did you know there's a plan behind carrying industry and money out of this country? Corporations have money to invest. U.S. Steel just spent $6 billion to acquire Marathon Oil Company instead of rebuilding its steel plants. Don't you think that's odd, seeing as how many steel workers are out of work today? One of the great crimes of America today, that our government, our economy, and the moguls of industry have allowed our own steel industry to go down. I think it's one of the worst things that has happened to this nation in this century, leaving us vulnerable and defenseless in time of war. General Electric added 5,000 workers to its payroll by adding 30,000 foreign jobs and reducing its United States employment by 25,000 jobs. Who are the heads of these multinational corporations that have no loyalty to America and by heart and by their deeds prove themselves not to be true Americans? In part, deindustrialization is motivated by a plan to develop international specialization of labor in order to make it easier to establish a new world order. A new world order. The economies of the nations are being rearranged by the international bankers and by the multinational corporations. They want a new world order where the little people of the nations have nothing to say about what they do. In fact, where the little people are the slaves of the state and the economy. I hear the soul of George Washington, who declared, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. So far, I mean, as we are now at liberty to do it." We are giving away bites of our soul when we give away our money, our economy, our industry, and our Panama Canal. The net result of this deliberate policy to disinvest in America is the loss of somewhere between 32 and 38 million jobs during the decade of the 70s. It's not just a job that's lost, it's one's life, one's self-esteem, one's dreams, one's life. All that one has worked for one's children and one's family. Generations of one's own family gone before, knocked out because someone is rearranging our life and our world according to their design, not ours. We better find out who they are and what they're doing through the flame of freedom that speaks in our breasts. The people of America are caught between the debt bomb, the inflation recession cycle, and the deindustrialization of America. The dollar, although it appears to be strong, is nearly worthless. It's only stronger against other currencies of the world that are more worthless. And the economy, not only of this nation but other nations, is on the verge of collapse. Take note of this. They can't pay back their loans, so the frantic ones at the top create more paper money. It is worthless, and ultimately the whole deck of cards must come tumbling down. And they want it to come down on our heads, and we say, let it be upon their heads. This is the American Revolution, 1984. It is an economic revolution, and it is waged not for this nation alone, but for the people of the whole world. It is a revolution where we say once more, no to the tyrants. We, the people of planet Earth, do have certain inalienable rights derived from Almighty God, which rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The abundant life guaranteed and vouchsafed to us by our Creator is ours, and we are given the mandate by our God to take dominion over the earth. And there are those who do not want us to take over this earth. There are those who have not believed that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. They want the world and its control for themselves, for their little nuclei of power elite. Beloved hearts of freedom worldwide, I address you. Our first premise: greater is He, the Almighty One, who is in you, than he that is in the world. The second premise: our numbers far outnumber and outweigh by light, by numbers themselves, the oppressors, the manipulators, and the destroyers, and they fear the people as they always have. The tyrants of this world, the power elite, the moneyed interests, they have their power by your consent and mine, by your money and mine, or by our combined lethargy. They exist only by the will of the people. The will of the people enlightened and educated, withdrawing their support of these demagogues, can turn the world around, can ignite a revolution and win it. Their tactic is intimidation by reverse psychology. They make us believe that we need them, when the reverse is true. They need us. Economic slavery is one of the greatest forms of tyranny over the mind, the body, the soul, and the health of one's psychology. We, the American people, should be enjoying the abundant life God gave to us, and instead we, the people of the greatest nation on earth, are being oppressed by the gangsters and sociopaths who have been playing with our money for decades. Even though the Soviet Union has the best equipped army ever assembled, the hawkish Reagan administration is actually spending slightly less on defense than the dovish Carter administration had planned to spend if Carter had been reelected. Carter's administration had planned to spend $210 billion on defense in 1983. The Reagan administration spent $209.9 billion. Even though that is a lot of money, do not rest easy. Much of our defense budget is wasted. I hear the groan of the American taxpayer serving a wasteful bureaucracy. On May 30th, the House of Representatives took note of the excessive prices the Department of Defense pays for spare parts. The Pentagon is spending $9,000 for a 45-cent wrench, $436 for a $7 hammer, $466 for a $1.49 tool kit. You think my figures are in error? They're not. I will tell you where they come from. They come from greedy middlemen. They come from paying experts who have to make sure that the wrench or the hammer or the toolkit are in fine and working order. And all kinds of people pushing paper. Everyone wants to get padded from the defense budget. And those at the top want to justify bigger and bigger budgets. And so they have to show on paper that they need that amount of money. It is not money, as many Americans think, that gets a job done. It hasn't done the job in education. It doesn't do it in nations more socialistic than our own. Money is not the key to a nation. It's the community of the Holy Spirit. It's the mystical body of God. It's hearts one in the living Christ who understand that there is more than dollars and cents to life. And that's why the little people always survive in these debacles, because they weren't living on money and material goods in the first place. They never had enough. We hear the cry of the American people, undefended by a civil defense system or an anti-ballistic missile system. Has anybody knocked on your door and said, "I'd like to tell you what to do in case of a national emergency or a nuclear war"? Well, if you were a Soviet citizen today, you would have been instructed thoroughly. You would know to go to underground bunkers in Moscow. You would know where your place of safety is. You would know how to survive a nuclear war. Yes, you would. But not in the United States of America. Who are the representatives of the people who care not for the preparation of a nation? The film they made should not convince us that nuclear war is going to happen. It ought to convince us that our government doesn't care a whit as to whether or not we survive. That's the point of the film. That's why we got together and said, we better do something about it ourselves. We better set aside a piece of land and a haven where we can prove that we can be economically self-sufficient, where we know we can survive when all else fails. Because when they have a problem, when the system goes, they will bail out, and they will be not looking to help the little people. This church does not spend its money on a massive television campaign. It spends its money on its members, the individual members, and their future and safety and livelihood. That's where we put our money, and that's where we put our flame of freedom. Preachers on prime-time television say they're looking out for people's souls. Send us more money to keep on the air so we can save souls. Well, I'll tell you one thing. God is able to take care of our souls, but we have to take care of our bodies. Those false pastors are feeding themselves. And will they feed the people when the time comes? No. Let us look then to the sparks of freedom that fly as the communicators of the divine ideas that will win this war of Armageddon. These sparks move heart to heart, and the people who are in chains in the Soviet Union today, or in Red China, or in Afghanistan, or anywhere in the world, they feel our heart's fervor. They feel the flame of freedom. It is in their breasts. And that is the greatest communication system of the whole world. It's the power of the Holy Spirit for a world to be one. I hear the cry from the subconscious of the American people. At that basic level, they know they are undefended by a civil defense system or an anti-ballistic missile system. Some people think that these will provoke the Soviets. They have not studied history and they have not learned their lessons. And it goes back to the school systems. They have not been taught what is real, what is the declared intent of the Soviet Union, and what has been declared since 1917, which is the unrelenting takeover of the world. Nothing can provoke them. They are already provoked. They have a master plan, and we do not. We are reactors instead of the prime movers of the freedom revolution on planet Earth. Mind you, the Soviets are not the only threat. What happens when Gaddafi gets a bomb and a delivery system? Did you know that in 1983 the U.S. intelligence report said that Libya already had 5 crude but effective nuclear weapons? Wouldn't it be worth the trouble to have a system that could save Washington, D.C., or New York, or Chicago, in the event that some madmen tried to destroy 1 or 2 of our cities? After all, Nostradamus, and he was pretty accurate, he said they would ultimately fire rockets and destroy New York. He said it would come to pass, and those who have interpreted his prophecies say it is so within the next 10 to 30 years. We know that a people one with God can change a psychic prediction or even undo the prophecies of God when they spell calamity, because the only calamity that God ever allows is that which has to come tumbling down on people's heads to wake them up and make them realize they're out of alignment with a universal law of harmony. And therefore, if people will wake up without war and cataclysm, God will spare the hand of his prophecy, his dire prophecy, and he only gives it to warn us so we can save ourselves before it is too late. Now, if we had an orbital defense system of the kind proposed by General Daniel Graham, not only could we knock down a large percentage of a massive incoming Soviet attack, but we could also defend ourselves in the event of attacks from a variety of smaller enemies. And in the unlikely event a Dr. Strangelove fired our missiles at the Soviets, we could shoot them down rather than leave the Soviets with the choice of passively accepting an American first strike or returning fire. I hear the cries of those who fear an unnecessary war with the Soviet Union, and I see the reaction of fear in a pacifism that is unwarranted and unwise, because it is a peace without honor, and it invites invasion and takeover, as has been shown over and over and over again in thousands of years of history of military strategy and wars that have been fought. Pacifism never wins. Peace, backed by the flame of freedom that speaks, is power, and it's the power of the people. I feel the flame of freedom burning in my breast as you do, burning as a literal fire, burning with such an intensity of God's love that it awakens me in the night. I feel that flame desiring to devour world hatred of the Christ in his little ones, who will suffer under some kind of calamity, nuclear war or economic, if we do not act. Did you know that the Soviet military-industrial complex was built by Western capital and technology entirely? Did you know that the Order, a conspiratorial group that appears to be the power behind the American establishment, creates wars and revolutions for its own purpose, world takeover? Well, before you deny it or scoff, you better read about the expose by Anthony Sutton. You better read about the documents and the irrefutable evidence that he presents in his books. Yes, the Order builds its strategy around the Hegelian dialectic. They build up conflicting systems, pit them against one another in war or economic strife or ideological clashes, driving brother against brother. And they're confident of gaining greater power and control over the nations by manipulating the outcome. The financial powers of Wall Street built up Hitler's Germany and the Soviet Union. If you don't believe it, check the facts before you deny it. We can't remain ostriches forever. This has been done and it's well known. This is the power elite creating and managing conflict, and then for their own un-American ends. World War II, with its 20 million deaths, was the result of managed conflict. Industry in the United States, at the impetus of the bankers, backing both sides for a predetermined and pre-desired outcome, while the little people are fodder in the dreams of world conquest of these power elite. Now the same financial and industrial powers are building up the Soviet empire. The Soviets, of course, believe war with the West is inevitable. They believe it inevitable, they prepare for it, they prepare their nation psychologically to believe that America is evil and wants that war, and to bring them to the brink where finally they are convinced that they can do naught else but begin or engage in that ultimate war. We say, from the heart of the American people to the hearts of the people of Mother Russia, let the flame of freedom speak. Let the flame of freedom carry our message far and wide. Let the people in the Soviet bloc nations know that we are their brothers and sisters in this fight for world freedom, that we are one, that we do know they suffer, and they suffer because Western governments do not act, not because Soviets torment and torture, but because we do not say, thus far and no farther. The government has become spineless, and the people must now learn that they must speak themselves, not through intermediaries. The people in Mother Russia must know that we do not trust their government, but we also do not trust our own, and we see through both power elites on both sides of the ocean, and we know what's happening. I hear the cry of freedom in the soul of Andrei Sakharov, sent into internal exile in the closed city of Gorky on account of his human rights activities. Sakharov has been on a hunger strike designed to force the Soviets to allow his wife to go to the West for medical treatment. There are rumors that he is very weak or even dead. Is he alive? We do not know. But whether in or out of the body, we know that the spirit of Andrei Sakharov is the flame of freedom that speaks. Well, the Soviets say he's fine. Being fine is a matter of definition. They said Andropov had a cold. And then he dropped off. They're liars, and we don't happen to believe a word they say. As a matter of necessity, the Soviets crush any form of dissent. They have a wide variety of prisons in which they put dissenters, extermination camps, special camps for women and children, or they can put them in a psychiatric prison where inmates are injected with drugs which can turn a healthy person into a vegetable. It's happening every day. And their souls are the souls that cry out in the flame of freedom. Who will answer them as they waste away in this incarceration? We will surely answer them with the greatest love, the greatest action, the greatest prayer force and decree momentum that the world has ever known. God is going to save this world for the little people because he made it for them. Sometimes prisoners are bound in a wet straitjacket and tied to a bed. As the jacket dries, it compresses the body with vice-like force. Who are these arch fiends that enjoy the torment of human souls and bodies? Who are they? Let them be exposed by the flame of freedom that speaks from the hearts of their victims. Soviet citizens are often arrested for their belief in God. Now hear this. The medical superintendent of one of the psychiatric hospitals believes that people who believe in God belong in a mental hospital. Well, pretty soon it's going to be the people who believe in God in a certain way, or the people who believe in God not the way everybody else thinks. If you believe in their system, their orthodoxy, political or religious, you're okay. But if you seek the path of the individual and you're willing to listen to the voice of the flame of freedom that burns in your breast, the flame that is God's divine spark, then watch out. Sooner or later, someone else who believes he knows better than you is going to restrict or attempt to restrict your comings and your goings. That's the reason that on July 4th, 1776, a group of people got together and signed the Declaration of Independence. That's the reason. Because they knew the tendency of power, power that corrupts and corrupts absolutely. And they knew the tendency and what it had been in Europe. They came here to see to it that no rights or freedoms, human or divine, lest they would encroach upon the well-being of all, should be denied any individual. We are here today to see that those rights are championed in America and extended to the whole world. We have known the meaning of persecution, and we have known the meaning of the victory of our God. And we are satisfied that He is the defender of the oppressed and those against whom injustice has been brought. We know the power of the flame of freedom that speaks, and that's why we are satisfied to be the instruments of God's holy flame of freedom. There are 100,000 Christians in Soviet prisons today. We pray for them. Some are incarcerated for the crime of organizing prayers at funerals, organizing baptisms without prior registration with the government, and giving religious instruction to children. Here, religion is our divine and human right. There, it is controlled by the state. Is that what we want? No. Then we must see to it that we do not allow it to happen by those who think that they are ordained to decide whether the people shall have private property, when their speech or religion or assembly or press shall be limited. An eyewitness of one of the prisons in the Soviet Union near the town of Archangel wrote, "We were transported to the camp by train and then by river barge. The hold of the barge was overfilled with prisoners who were forced to sit in a doubled-up position. There was hardly any air to breathe. We were not allowed to go to the toilet. We were issued old camp clothing and herded off to the logging area. We were driven there in such a way that by the time we arrived, we were half dead from exhaustion. I bring these things to our attention today as we celebrate our independence, lest we forget that while we enjoy freedom, some people suffer the abject degradation of their very humanity. Lest we forget. For fear of ending up in the isolation cell or it being put on hunger rations, we devoted all our energies to the work assigned to us, sinking into the deep snow in the process. After work, we were escorted back to the camp. We ran all the way back to the camp so as not to become numb from the cold. We ran, we fell, we cried. And today we cry also. We shed a tear for Mother Liberty as we feel the pain of this planetary outrage. There were times when the guards were absolutely bestial. Spotting a new prisoner, they might send him to fetch something outside the working area, which was marked off with red signal flags. On reaching the marked off area, the prisoner would be shot for attempting to escape. The guard who fired the shot would then be given leave as a reward. My beloved, this earth is the Lord's. Why do we allow it? We may not be able to stop those guards, But we ought to be able to challenge our own government and bankers and monopoly capitalists. We ought to be able to challenge them to stop feeding the money and the technology and the wheat and the gold to the Soviet Union that supports a system that treats our brothers and sisters in this inhumane fashion. Where are the activists for human rights? My heart is filled with the joy of the flame of freedom today, but I do not block out the suffering of my soul that I allow to be sensitive to pain, so that I will never forget to pray for these ones. And I pray that you also will not drown out the sensitivities of the World Mother in your own being. Drown it out through entertainment and the pleasure cult and drugs and all manner of surfeiting and noise, endless noise, bombarding the outer senses. It is time to go within and feel a planet in distress. Feel the pain of the World Mother as she is in travail to give birth to the Christ in every single heart. Members of Solidarity in Poland have been asked by the communist regime to emigrate, get out of the way, so you're no longer a nuisance, so we can keep the less revolutionary ones under our control. They have refused to leave their country. The price they pay, they're in prison. They're fed a low-protein diet, low-vitamin diet, because they will not leave. This regimen will slowly turn them into vegetables, or is calculated to do so. I believe that their faith and oneness with the Blessed Mother and with the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the flame of freedom within them will be a mighty power to defend them against becoming those vegetables. But we know that ultimately those who are so subjected must be liberated, must be freed, whether by God or man, whether in death or in life. And it is high time that we as Americans stopped turning our backs on the fact that the regime in Poland is alive and well today by the federal government of this nation, by the monopoly capitalists, and by the international bankers. That's why the system didn't come tumbling down. That's why solidarity didn't win. That's why. I hear the cry of Barbara Sadowska, whose son was beaten to death at a Polish police station in May of 1983. We are all mothers at heart. Can you imagine for a moment the suffering and the loss of your son or daughter, beaten to death, dying in battle, senselessly? Why isn't it clean and fair? Why aren't the forces of freedom on the march to win? Why don't we wipe out world communism, beginning in our houses of education? Why not? Because some who manage all of this don't want freedom to win. Because if the people are free, they won't have their money and they won't have their power. Therefore, they'd rather have money and power with the people enslaved. Just go out and look at the world and prove me wrong if you will. I'd like to see some evidence that it isn't so. Tell me it isn't so, and I'll know it's a dream. These people in Poland in Russia and other countries have to wait in line every day for the necessities of life. The bread that ought to be theirs, withheld by control. It is inhuman. It is degrading. It is designed to break the will and the creative spark of anyone. In Poland, they ask, what is 3 miles long and eats potatoes? The answer, a Polish meat queue. There's a joke about standing in line for bread and someone saying, I'm going to go and kill Andropov. To the horror of everyone else in line, she leaves. She comes back 6 hours later and she says, in answer to their questions, well, what happened? She says, the line was too long. While its own people do not have meat or bread or the necessities of life, this, mind you, being supposedly the ideals of communism. The Soviet Union is engaged today in 6 insurgencies, defending itself against forces fighting against the Soviets in Afghanistan, Mozambique, Angola, Nicaragua, Ethiopia, and Cambodia. People in these nations today are offering armed resistance to Soviet hegemonism. 6 areas of Soviet conquest. Are they haphazard? They are there by design, the design of world takeover. In Mozambique, the MNR guerrilla movement seems to have the upper hand over Marxist President Samora Machel. In Angola, UNITA, led by Dr. Jonas Savimbi, has control of a large portion of the country. But 30,000 Cuban troops keep the Soviet and Cuban-backed Marxist-Leninist MPLA government in power. And who pays these 30,000 troops in Angola? Gulf Oil, which provides Angola with about 80% of its revenues, keeps the Cubans there. And since they could not afford to give Castro the $100 per soldier per day they are reportedly paying for his mercenaries, we know where it comes from. This is a very simple example of a Western multinational corporation funding the communist takeover of a free nation. And the peoples of that nation, bound by that economy, must act independently of that subsidy to the communists, which does not make it a fair fight. And still, they are in control of areas of the country. Now, who of all free governments of the West have offered to help the people defend their free land? Who goes out to help them? Not even a capitalist corporation will throw its weight into the side of the freedom fighters. This is the great tragedy and travesty of our time, that bit by bit the world is being devoured by communism, and the American government is not preaching to its people that soon there will be only one nation left that is free. Or will it be free by the time the whole world is enslaved? Will it be too late? I think we should act today, not wait for ourselves to be surrounded, not wait for the whole world to be subjugated. And you know, as I know, that the first to die when the communists march in are their lists of freedom fighters. And thus they kill off generations of professionals, of educated people, and of the daring revolutionaries. And thus, so far in this century, it has worked. Very few nations where communism has taken over have ever recovered and become free again, thanks to the hands-tied policy of the West. Who do the Western powers think they're saving? They think they're saving their own power elite system, but they're not. They're creating an international sorcerer's apprentice, and they will not be able to control it. Unless we, the people, make the difference, one day there'll be another reign of terror, and their heads will roll, and they will find out that they could not control their managed conflict, that one side or the other got out of hand. And of course, there's always betrayal and rivalry among the power elite. That is the characteristic trait they have shown in all ages. So much for Mozambique and Angola, freedom fighters standing their own. In Nicaragua, a variety of groups, the FDN, the ARDE, the Mosquito, Sumo and Ramo Indians, the Catholic Church, and a business group are trying to oust the Sandinistas. And our Congress debates whether or not we should help the freedom fighters in Nicaragua. While students in our institutions of higher learning are told that it is the communists we should fight for and support. If they knew the real history, if they knew the truth, they would stand on the side of the flame of freedom, because they would know that the communists perceive anyone who betrays his own government as the first who must go, because he will also be a traitor in their system. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge and two non-communist groups, the Khmer People's Liberation Front and the National United Front for an independent, neutral, and peaceful Kampuchean government, are trying to oust the government of Heng Samrin, which was installed by the Vietnamese communists in December of 1978. Who will help them? Who will help the people of Cambodia? I can tell you one thing. I know a lot of red-blooded Americans who would fight for the people of Cambodia if their own government would not stab them in the back and betray them in the process. In Afghanistan, the Mujahideen control about 90% of the country, at least by night. They are in desperate need of military supplies, such as anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons, and food, shoes, and medical supplies. The CIA is reported to have a $100 million plus aid package for the Afghans. But about 95% of the aid, which currently passes through Pakistan, gets skimmed off on the way. And the freedom fighters of Afghanistan today do not have what they need to liberate their nation from Soviet takeover. And then, is it going to be the Marines that have to go back to the Middle East because now the Soviets have their passageway to control the oil and the economies of the Middle East? They are moving in from every direction. At what point does the United States of America and the free nations stand and say, "Thus far and no farther, you shall not pass"? Where do we draw the line? That is the question each individual must answer. Will you have to answer it when a Chinese communist or a Soviet or some foreign army is at your door, at your border, in your state capital? Then will you answer? These people all over the world cry out to us. They cry out to us, and it is a planetary shame. It is a disgrace beyond disgrace that we who have won our revolution are not still fighting for freedom. It's the whole planet now It's not just a nation half slave and half free. The question is, can a planet survive half slave and half free? We say it cannot. You cannot have a slave economy dependent on a free economy and trading back and forth, because the free economy is going to be at the disadvantage. You can't have proper competition in life when one side is supplied by the other side. Nikolai Ryzhkov, a 19-year-old private who deserted the Soviet army, says the morale of the 100,000 Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan is extremely low, and that the drug problem among those soldiers is large. He says you can imagine how happy the rebels are to sell their hashish for guns to kill Russians. Russians selling their guns for hashish. Sounds like the corruption of Vietnam, only then it was the communists corrupting our men with hashish. Ryzhkov was told that he would be defending the Russian border from Chinese and American mercenaries, but he saw none. The Soviet Union exports franchises of totalitarian government, somewhat like we export McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken. The Soviets provide the overall coordination and planning. East Germans help develop the secret police. North Koreans and Eastern Europeans handle the military training. The Cubans provide the muscle where needed. All that a would-be dictator would have to do is be willing to cooperate with the Soviet leadership. Well, we all know that just as we can make our vow to Almighty God and receive the intercession of His angels, that we could also make a pact with the devil, and he would rush in to build up such a dictatorship and an empire. And we know that in every nation there are those who will sell themselves to the Soviet Union for power and for money. And we see it all over the West, including in our own country, as our own people trade with the Soviets, selling our secrets, our technology. When I ride down Malibu Canyon, I don't drive there once, not once a day, without thinking to myself, here, right here, where there are the most top secret research laboratories and factories, over this same road where my tires are now plowing, are American betrayers selling down the river our edge in the nuclear age. And there are Soviet spies tempting them, always with money, or compromising them and then using blackmail. Right where we are, not in some far-off world, not on another planet, but on the very roads we use, there are operators subverting our nation. The nations where there are the anti-Soviet insurgencies all occupy key spots on the geopolitical map. Mozambique and Angola sit astride key sea lanes. Ethiopia sits on the approach to the Red Sea. Nicaragua occupies a key position in Central America. Afghanistan is the hub of the Eurasian land mass. Indochina is key to the Soviets' plans to encircle China. A Soviet defeat in any of these areas, especially Afghanistan, would be extremely damaging to Moscow. It would destroy their image of invincibility and set back their plans for global hegemony. Let free people everywhere act, even when their governments refuse to defend their brothers and sisters under communist oppression. Let a free people act while they are yet free. I hear the people of the world crying out to the mother of the world. I hear the cry of 1.5 million people who have fled Indochina to freedom in the last 9 years. The United States alone has taken in about 654,000 refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Another 414,000 are virtually prisoners in camps in 10 Asian countries. Vietnamese boat people continue to risk their lives in flimsy sea vessels, but fewer are reaching safe havens. About 44,000 boat people reached safety in 1982. Last year, the figure dropped to 28,000. The number left to drown at sea is thought to have significantly increased. All this because of the manipulation of the war in Vietnam by the international power elite. And our own men have suffered as much as the people of Vietnam themselves in degradation, disorientation, and having to deal with the raw fact that they were betrayed by the government and the people of this nation in Vietnam. I hear the cry of the people of Cambodia who were devastated when from 1975 to 1978, the Khmer Rouge killed 2.5 million of the nation's 7 million people. And we knew it was going on. And we knew it was because we pulled out of Vietnam. And then in 78, they were invaded by the Vietnamese. We hear the cries of the thousands who disappeared in Argentina between 75 and 82, who were abducted, tortured, and murdered by extremists. I hear the flame of freedom crying out for a haven through the person of Ixia Yuran, who 2 years ago climbed out of a window in the Chinese consulate in San Francisco and asked for asylum in the United States. Receiving escapees from communist nations is one thing we can do without impunity. It's one thing we can hold out, the flame of freedom. If you can get here, we'll take you. Not so. Not so. Last January, at the urging of the Reagan administration, which noted that a Chinese official assured the State Department, a State Department official, that Mr. Ixia would not be penalized if he were returned to China. Would any of you believe that? No. I don't think the State Department believed it either. Then why did the administration want to play footsie with Red China? Why does it want to get along with those who torture their people? The Chinese physicist, Mr. Ixia, was denied asylum by a federal immigration judge. Where is he, and what has happened to him today? I hear the anguished cries of people throughout Central America as the blight of war spreads from Cuba across their lands. I see the repression and militarization of Nicaragua taking place, where the right to dissent is denied, where freedom of the press and assembly have been abolished, and where religious freedoms have been curtailed. 10,000 Cuban soldiers who have taken over the security police have helped make the Nicaraguans captives in their own land. Just imagine yourself. Imagine Cuban troops marching in today and saying, "You have no right to be free in America." Since the Sandinistas have taken over, Nicaraguan Jews have had their rights systematically violated. The Protestant Mosquito Indians were slaughtered or herded into concentration camps, and their crops and villages were destroyed. Members of Somoza's National Guard have been hunted down and killed, often by the vest cut, the cutting off of the arms and legs and leaving the victim to bleed to death. How do men become worse than animals when indoctrinated by Marxism? What is it about this filthy system that causes people to maim others? Fanaticism in the extreme right or left succumbs to the ungodly nature and propensity that all of us must put out, must subdue, by the flame of freedom. From 79 to 83, communist guerrilla attacks have caused $826 million worth of damage to the El Salvadoran economy. Right and left-wing death squads terrorize civilian populations while the nation struggles valiantly toward democracy. What does a communist system have to offer when all is said and done, when by its very actions it can be seen as an ideology of death, whose ends and means are always death and destruction? Mexico today is so riddled with corruption and displays of wealth by party leaders that the CIA thinks the disparity between the haves and the have-nots could create a situation like Iran under the Shah. Jose Lopez Portillo may have banked $1 billion when he was president of Mexico between 76 and 82, and his predecessor may have banked nearly as much. What can you expect the people to do when the supposed representatives of a free enterprise system rob them blind? It is a setup by the corruption of the rightist elements for the takeover of communism. And neither extreme right or extreme left will have our vote, but the living Christ in the hearts of the people. For the prophet said, the government shall be upon his shoulders. We believe that by the divine spark, the Christ flame that God has placed in our hearts, that we have the right and the ability to be self-governed. We look not for the kingdom here and the kingdom there, for a savior in a political ideology or system. We do not think we are going to be saved by socialism, by communism, or by capitalism. We believe that we are going to be saved by the living Christ with us, the Lord, our righteousness. He said, the kingdom of God is within you, and I believe him. We hear the cries of terrorism and war arising from conflict in India between the Sikhs and the Hindus in the Punjab, taking more than 1,000 lives and causing over $1 billion of damage to the economy of the Punjab. Strife among brethren proves that they follow a religion of the letter and not of the spirit. A religion has become a fanaticism when in the name of it people can kill or deprive others of their rights or destroy their countries or believe they are received in the arms of Almighty God. Beloved ones, this world hatred coming upon us was prophesied by Jesus, not because it has to be, but to tell us that we must invoke the sacred fires of the Holy Ghost for the consuming of world hatred that divides us. It is not religion that divides us. It is the hatred of the devil whispering in one another's ears, so-and-so thinks this way, therefore he is evil. God's people are good people everywhere, and sometimes evil forces move against them. Instead of fighting one another, let us defend one another against those forces. What is evil? It's that which destroys and kills. It's that which breaks the human spirit. It is that which puts out love and engenders fear. fear through misunderstanding. It's all over the world, and it must be consumed by that flame of freedom, not only burning in us, but speaking through us. God gave us the power of the spoken word and placed us above all other creatures. Because we can speak, we can create. The word is the creative power. Jorge Valls is a plantado. That is, he is a die-hard Cuban patriot who would not be re-educated nor compromise in any way with Castro or his regime. He was imprisoned for 20 years by Castro. He wrote frantically, secretively, using scraps of paper and cloth and ink made from spittle and dust or his own blood. He documented the full horror of life in Castro's prisons and endured the last 4 years of his 20-year sentence incommunicado, in solitary confinement. He was released from prison, praise God, and not Castro. On June 21, 1984, he was released. He is an example of what the Washington Times called that special spark which in human diversity has been unable to extinguish. Castro allowed him to leave Cuba, and today he is the flame of freedom that can speak freely. And he is finally and at last rejoining his wife. Lou Peters had an auto dealership in Lodi, California. When the mafia tried to buy him out, he went to the FBI. He helped them gain enough information on Joe Bonanno, a mafia boss, that Bonanno was convicted of conspiracy to obstruct justice in 1980, which led to a 5-year sentence in federal prison. In the course of his dealings with the mob, Peters voluntarily divorced his wife, Marilyn, for the safety of his family. This is the heart of a patriot. Although his wife was aware of the circumstances, Lou told no one else, including his daughters. For Lou, the challenge of the mafia was a matter of basic old-time patriotism. He said, "If I don't do this, who will?" That's the attitude. Several weeks after Bonanno's conviction, Lou Peters remarried his wife. And then he contracted cancer, and he died on June 20th, 1981. His tombstone was engraved with the following words: "Honor thy country. Honor thy country." We who are believers in a continuity of life, in the law of reincarnation, can appreciate the inner life of the soul of Lou Peters. We can imagine mighty angels strengthening him for this sacrifice made for you and me. He realized that the economy is under attack by gangsters, not only the mafia, but all whom we have named. And somehow, in the equation of his lifespan and that which was coming upon him, his soul determined to make a sacrifice which his wife and daughters and all of us can be proud of. I can assure you that in that soul there is the satisfaction. I have fought the good fight and won. May we all see to it that we ourselves remember the words, that these dead shall not have died in vain. For all who can no longer speak, for they have fought their battles and gone on. For the saints who wait under the altar of God, we must say, these dead shall not have died in vain. We will be their voice of the flame of freedom that speaks today. We have a dream of freedom, and we have the right to dream. We have the vision of what life on earth can and should be, and we have a right to have visions. We have a land that is free, and we are free-born. And here from this heart of our inner retreat, which God through our spirits has consecrated to a spiritual and moral and human victory of our people, we will send forth sparks from the torch of freedom that will truly light a world. Thank you. Keepers of the flame, friends and neighbors, this day we celebrate the meeting of our fundraising goal for our fall payment for our ranch, finally and fully met and transferred to Malcolm Forbes. It is a victorious day, and the victory belongs to the conquerors. And you know, the greatest joy in my heart is to see all of you, and to know that all of you made this possible. The Swedes, the Danes, the Germans, the Australians, the Americans from every state, the Canadians, those from Central and South America, all of you have said, this is our shrine, this is our land, this is where we want to make a statement that a people can yet be free, economically, spiritually, in their families, in their education, in all that they think and say and do. And so, this land is your land, this land is my land, this land was made for you and me.